All right, Chris, we're looking at this week at two Bible plans. So we have quite a bit to cover here. I know we both had talked and enjoyed one maybe slightly more than the other,
Probably.
but we'll talk about the reason for that and just kind of what we were kind of getting out of it. But as per usual, we start with the wisdom before the hopefully funny. And what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts?
Nice. Well, it's funny. So you and I talked a little bit this week about it. But it just occurred to me, I'm like, no, why did we have to do two back-to-back ones on pride? Is God trying to tell me something?
Yep.
But and actually that is something that it struck me. It seemed like so the last one, the one by Pete Briscoe,
Right.
had a real sort of team or competition kind of angle built into it.
Yeah.
And it didn't really speak to me, not because I didn't do that as a kid or not unfamiliar, but a lot of the things I do now are, if I'm competing with anything, I'm competing with what I did yesterday or last time or whatever. I'm not, so I don't have a lot of competitive drive versus other folks. Okay. And so I don't have a competitive drive that necessarily makes me feel like I'm better than or prideful towards other people in that respect. But as I think through these things, as Zach and I were talking earlier today about how humility is almost like it's almost hard to come by, even if you're trying to be humble.
Yeah.
And recognizing, this is sort of summarizing a little bit, but recognizing that every gift that you have, whether it's like if it's music, which I could speak to easily, or if it's basketball, or if it's, you're a championship bingo player.
Right.
Best. Every gift comes from God. And, it reminded me then that the word says, if you're going to boast about anything, boast about Jesus. Right. So, yeah, I was wrestling with certain angles of pride, just trying to wrestle with my humility, thinking going into these Bible studies, I'm probably more humble than that.
Yeah.
And then recognizing almost, well, regularly, let's say. I was going to say daily, but it's probably more frequent than that. Recognizing areas where God is exposing pride in my life. And they come at me in unsuspecting areas, right? Places I'm not thinking about. And
Oh, hang on. Sorry, I made a mistake here. I muted everybody.
I'll unmute me though.
Thank you thank you. Go ahead. Keep going.
Well, so for example, what we were talking about earlier today, someone had to teach me what humble looks like.
Right.
Someone had to teach me that there's a thing called false humility. Everybody nod if you've heard of that. Yeah.
Smart when people are muted. Good call.
Right. So false humility it looks a little bit like, let's imagine Zach walks up to me after church and says, and that one song was so powerful, I appreciate the way you did that. And I go, oh, for God's glory, it's God, it's all God, which is true enough. But if my heart is kind of like, tell me more about me, but it's all God, then that's false humility.
Stop.
Yeah, stop. So someone had to teach me that there's a proper way to respond. Like when you've got, you're gifted at something and someone compliments the way that you utilize your gift, the right response is just to be thankful. Well, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for your encouragement. Thanks for saying that. As opposed to go on.
Yep.
and false humility looks as just as gross as pridefulness. And we all know what pridefulness looks like. And we know people who are prideful in certain areas of their life or something they're good at, or even something maybe they're not good at, or they used to be good at. And it's, you kind of can only tolerate a little bit of that, a person who behaves that way. But
Right.
false humility comes off the same way.
So this was challenging for me too as I was thinking, because I mean, it's just easier when something's black and white. It's just easier when something is like a clear, hey, don't steal. All right, I won't steal, you
Yeah,
know?
let's don't. Yeah.
But when you're talking about pride and you're talking about competition and you're talking about, humility, false humility, pride, that kind of stuff, a lot of this to me comes down to honesty, I think.
Yeah.
Um, because there's times where, going back to what you were saying just a second ago, there's times where like if I did something that was pretty cool, pretty impressive, that doesn't happen all the time. But if I did it and somebody came up and was like, "Hey, that's really cool," and I was like, "Nah, that was nothing,"
Mm.
like then, I mean, that's just not true, right? They're coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I think I saw something cool and I want to compliment you," and I'm kind of I'm lying, right? And so I think owning that and being honest and saying, and you can just say thank you, but I think
Right.
this is where these problems start to come into play, is when you're starting to lie and you're either lying to other people or you're lying to yourself or you're lying to God.
Well, and think
Right?
about this too. And I know we sort of touch on this at some point, but um, you compliment me and I blow it off.
Mm-hmm.
What am I saying about you?
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right? Like and so if we go way back a few weeks and talk about people are worthy of honor because they're made in God's image.
Right?
And so it probably was, you know, a little bit brave for you to even broach the subject and walk up to somebody who is good at something
Yeah.
and say, man, I really appreciated that.
Right.
Right. And start the conversation with a compliment like that.
Right.
It's a little bit vulnerable, maybe.
Yeah.
And for them to excuse you,
Right.
right? Like, yeah, whatever. Right? I mean, that's pretty haughty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough. It's a tough thing to experience, right? If you go up to somebody, I mean, we probably mostly know it. You go up and you give somebody a compliment, and they discredit you almost, right? They're like, "Oh, it was
Yeah.
nothing cool," or they don't accept your compliment. You're like, "Just accept my compliment, man. You did something cool. Own that, and let me thank you for it." And I
Yeah.
think this is, as I think about this pride as a bigger picture kind of thing. It's just this inaccurate view of who we are, right, and what our identity is and what our worth is, right? Because either I become proud, and I think I'm better than other people. I'm more deserving of God's love. I'm more deserving of forgiveness. I'm just better than them all around. Or the exact kind of opposite problem, and I start to think that other people are better than me, and neither one of those are true, right? And I
Right.
do think it's important to kind of recognize there's this clarification, there's this separation between kind of our relationship with God and our relationship with each other to some degree, right? That it is fair for me to say somebody's better at basketball than me. It's not fair
Hmm.
for me to say that somebody is a better human being than I am, right?
Right.
Not true, right? God went to the cross, Christ went to the cross and died equally for us because he loves us equally and he wants to save both of us equally, right? And desperately.
See, that's what pride then, um, pride puts us face front with the reality that we are valuing something over Jesus,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It puts us right in the middle, or it exposes us
Mm-hmm.
with, that I'll go back to it. We're worth something because God says we're worth something.
Mm-hmm.
We're worthy of honor because he's worthy of honor. We have value because I'm the reason he's on the cross, and so are you, and so are all of you.
Right.
So he says you're worth that. So anything that I'm boastful about, anything I'm prideful about is a thing that I put in front of that and say, yeah, but I find my own value
Yeah.
in my ability to play guitar or whatever.
When you look at there's, I love the phrase, there, but by the grace of God go I, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can look at, I think pretty fairly, you should be able to look at anybody struggling with any sin or anything and say, there, but by the grace of God go I. Right? I could look at somebody who's struggling hugely, with drug abuse and drug addiction, and I could easily say, you know what, right situation happened when I was growing up, right? Yada yada yada, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
an addict. You know, like I'm not better than somebody. I might be better off in some ways than some people because of what God has blessed me with. And to
Right.
turn that around and say, okay, God blessed me with this thing, so I'm better than somebody, that doesn't make
See, and
any
this is
sense.
where this
But we do it,
this
and
is
I do it.
right, and this is what I was talking about kind of earlier, that sort of knife edge of actual humility,
Yes.
because people have used that phrase, there, but for the grace of God go I, much the same way that the Pharisees stand in the street and go, thank you, God, that I'm not like these sinners over here,
Yep. Right.
right? Well, and there, but for the grace of God go I. I could easily be a dirty faced sinner, but I am
Uh-huh.
a disciple of Christ. Well,
That's
true
and
enough, but where's your heart, right? God's looking for humble hearts.
see that's and this is where, like, you talk about the knife's edge. I mean, even the comparison that I just used, right? Saying, I could be an addict. I have exact the exact same level of sin in my life as somebody who's addicted to drugs. Right? Even right now, even though I'm not an addict to drugs, I'm even presently no better than somebody who would be struggling like that, right? And so
Sure.
even in the example that I used, you can see pride, and kind of saying like, yeah, but I'm kind of better off. It's like, no, I am still equally sinful as people who are steeped in sin because I'm steeped in sin.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm washed clean of it, right? So I want to praise God for that and thank Him for that. But even presently, I'm not better, than anybody, and I don't have less temptation or less desire to ignore God. One of my things, and this, my pride can really go up and down because I easily find my value in people. Just kind of, it's always been,
Yeah.
one of the challenges that I have is just that, I really like it when people like me, and I really don't like it when people don't like me or when they're
Right.
disappointed in me.
Yeah.
And so I can become very proud, be like, yeah, everybody likes me, I'm good. And I can be very, very kind of opposite of proud, right? Very kind of giving myself less value than I deserve, for kind of the opposite. And that is just, it's an easy temptation. I know it's one that a lot of us fall into, but it's not what God, shares with us, right? Our value doesn't come from other people. It doesn't come from whether people, like us or are impressed by us or aren't, right? You could be doing exactly what God's kind of calling you to do, and a bunch of people could dislike you. You look
Yeah.
at Stephen in the Bible, right? He did exactly what God wanted him to do and had a bunch of people stone him to death.
Yep.
And there's tons of examples of that. And so that's just something that I was thinking about as I was kind of reflecting on this pride thing. Just trying to focus on what I allow to affect what I believe my value is. What I believe my identity
Yeah.
is. Is it people? Is it circumstances? Is it situations? Is it skills? Is it athleticism? Is it, whatever? Or is it from God and the Bible? you know, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Like, who does God say that you are?
Right.
And I think if we asked anybody right now, if we ask ourselves, the first thing that we'll talk about in terms of pride is um, that we endeavor to be humble. In
Yeah.
fact, we'll sort of tear our own self down a little bit with that false humility, we'll tear our own self down a little bit to
Yeah.
to work on that humbleness, or to appear to be humble, which is
Hmm.
scary, right? To appear to be humble.
Well,
But, and each of us, if you think it through, there's an area where you're pretty high on yourself. There's always some area, and no matter how bad you try to tear yourself down, when somebody gets in that area, you might be like, yeah, but right. And so,
well,
like, we're constantly out of balance because we're trying to go this way and we're trying to go that way, and we don't spend, I don't think, enough time listening to God speak to us about who He says we are and why we have value.
yeah.
Right? Why we have value. We are like the reward that He went to the cross for. I don't see myself as a reward, right?
There was,
And He delights in you. I was saying that earlier this week
yes.
because it reminded me of a song, right?
Yeah.
Well, He delights in you. That passage doesn't start with, if you behave thus and so, He delights in you. No, He just does. He made you, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and He delights in you.
And that is just, yeah. I mean, I really don't think you can say it enough. And in fact, when I think about, why do we need to spend a certain amount of time in Scripture or in prayer, and why is that important when it's passages that we've already read or anything like that? Man, there's just so much out there to to trick us about pride, right? I mean, there are so many temptations with pride. There are so many, and ultimately, right? It's idolatry, right? It's idolatry of self, right? Um, and and I think you're right. I mean, you want to spend the appropriate time listening to what God says to you and about you. That will at least balance out. Well, that would overwhelm, right? What the world says or what you say to yourself, right?
Right.
Okay, we've been chatting for just about 16 minutes, and we're trying to be respectful of everybody else's time, because we could talk forever, as you
True
all
enough.
know, and sometimes we do when we're alone.